Welcome to another ClimateTech podcast, conversations with the people trying to save us from ourselves. In this episode, I spoke with Manca Jurca of ClimatePartner here in Vienna. Going back to 2006, ClimatePartner is one of the pioneers in helping companies go carbon neutral. We talked about how companies can get started, some best practices for climate communication, and why bogs are the best. I'm Ryan Grant Little. Thanks for being here. Manca, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for inviting me.
ClimatePartner has more than 6,000 customers in 60 countries. So you're a big company and you're all over the place. You're based in Vienna. You're from Slovenia originally, and you're working with clients in Central and Eastern Europe. What does ClimatePartner do for these 6,000 customers? What problem is it solving?
Well, that's hard to answer in just one sentence. But, the name already tells you ClimatePartner. It's going to have something to do with the climate. So basically what we do as a company is we help corporate companies take climate action. So the idea behind this is we are not set on just letting the politics do its job, because sometimes, as we have seen, unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Maybe the mills sometimes are just too slow, especially on a global level. So what we do is we really encourage then the companies to really proactively start looking at their CO2 emissions and, of course, reducing their CO2 emissions with the help of different solutions, so that we can, with the help of companies, kind of fill that gap that we currently have between our ambition levels and between where we are right now. So I work mostly with companies actually in Austria, and now we have really started kind of to expand also proactively in Eastern Europe, especially since I come from Slovenia. We have had quite some Slovenian companies already jump on board, and we really see a lot of motivation in this area that somehow has been a little bit left behind by many companies in our business.
So in countries, I'm thinking like larger Eastern European countries like Poland, is this becoming a topic? Is this more and more at the center of corporate decision making?
I believe so. I definitely believe so. Globally, no one can ignore this issue anymore. If someone is still trying to do that, then
there's a lot of people who are still trying to ignore it.
There's, of course, they're going to grab the last straw to keep their businesses running. We don't have to talk about who that is. But of course, yes. But I would say for most of people capable not only of critical thinking, but also just looking around ourselves, really can understand that we have entered a new era where nature is going to start dictating a bit differently than it has so far, because we've just ruined so many systems. So, of course, for corporates, there's one level of just kind of the intrinsic motivation that they have because they see what's happening around us. And a lot of CEOs really now start to understand that this is going to have a big impact on them personally and, of course, on their employees, but also on the company. So they start thinking about these climate risks. Now, of course, traditionally, especially Western and Northern Europe has been more progressive in this matter, but markets like Poland or Slovenia that I already mentioned, they are closely connected to all these companies in Eastern Europe. So of course they also see the marketing potential, the potential also to maybe increase their sales, to position themselves better in the market, besides this intrinsic motivation that I've already mentioned. But we started in 2006. Maybe I can just tell you a little bit about the story. So it's kind of this classical founder story. It didn't start in a garage, but it started in a very small apartment in Munich. So our founder, Moritz Lehmkuhl, of course, borrowed some money from his parents. That's how you have to start a company. You got to borrow some money from your parents and start really slow. And basically, he just started annoying some print shops saying, hey, because, in 2006, when you look back, we kind of mostly what we were talking about, unfortunately still, in terms of climate action was kind of like, okay, paper comes from trees and trees are kind of good for climate action. Maybe we should use less paper, or maybe we should use kind of more sustainable paper. So that's where he really went into. And most of the clients we had in the first few years were actually just small print shops. And then more and more companies started to be aware that they also need to do something in climate action. And then kind of around 2018, 2019, Fridays for Future started happening. Greta Thunberg started to be everywhere in the media. And I love that story because that's when suddenly companies started proactively calling us and asking what they can do in climate action. So actually it was the kids we usually don't take so seriously, who started this kind of big change because they went on the streets and they said, guys, what's happening? You're messing with our future. What are you going to do about it?
It's amazing to me how many companies, politicians, like grown-ups talk about Greta Thunberg and Fridays for Future in 2019 as being the reason that they started making changes. So it's really fascinating that what an impact she has had kind of on the corporate world that I think we don't always appreciate.
No, absolutely. I mean, you can see what kind of impact she has had based on all the criticism that she's getting from, certain, let's say, political sides or lobbies. And that's the best thing that can happen to you. That's when you really know you're doing something really good. When the oil lobby starts really disliking you and posting stuff about you in the media.
When Donald Trump is telling you to get some friends. That's when you know you've made it.
Yeah, exactly. But not to get too political, it's not just her, it's kids all around the world who really kind of heard this message. And where companies, again, of course, they are also thinking of the future of their employees, of their families, of their kids, but they also see this generation as the next generation consumers, as the next generation employees. Employer branding being such a hot topic right now because everyone is searching for new, young, educated employees. Well, guess what? These employees want their companies to do something good. They don't want to work in companies where they feel like the company is maybe harmful for the environment. So it doesn't have to be necessarily ClimatePartner, not necessarily working in climate action, but just taking climate action seriously and really taking new steps towards, reducing their emissions, towards just achieving a positive impact in the world. And I have so many companies that I work with, and they surprise me time and time again because these are some usually traditionally very conservative companies from which you wouldn't maybe expect that they will be so motivated to do, to take part in climate action, where they have a young employee who comes on board. I had one company from Austria where this young employee, he was a student, started working during the summer there, and he sent an email addressed to the CEO with his, sorry, I'm thinking of the English word now. Sometimes I have troubles translating directly from German, but with kind of his ideas and tips of how they can take climate action within this very, very conservative, traditional industry. He achieved it. And so this email really reached the CEO. They disagreed with some of the ideas, but that's fine. He started a conversation around this. So yeah, definitely straight a bit from the main topic there, but young people are really making a huge change in the corporate world.
So it's been my experience working with larger companies, and let me know if this resonates with you. A lot of them have struggled for years to get kind of the net zero goal by X date through the board. And that was kind of like the 2020 hit, and people were like, okay, like our 2025 or 2030 goal, it doesn't seem so far away now as it did somehow in 2018 as we ticked over into the 20s. But it feels like achieving that milestone of just getting the commitment to go net zero by a certain time has been really exhausting, right? It's been really like political and resource intensive and challenging within organizations. And my feeling is that a lot of them kind of hit that, they got it through, got it approved, and then sort of went tools down and said, okay, like we did it. And actually, it's kind of like, it's like, registering for the marathon isn't the hard part. Running it is.
Yeah.
And so now I see, I talk to a lot of corporates and they're like, okay, we've made this commitment. And now we're just trying to figure out how to start. And I feel like you probably talk to a lot of companies in this situation. It's like, hi, we have a climate problem. Help us. What is your professional advice to companies that haven't started yet? How should they start?
Yeah. So just to kind of go back to setting yourself a net zero goal, it is an ambitious goal. And usually what we do try to do with companies is to advise them before they've even set themselves this goal, to just kind of see, is this in any universe realistic in this moment for you? Not to be pessimistic, but if you set yourself a net zero goal until 2030, which is extremely ambitious, do you know that you have the means on any sort of level to achieve it. So that, of course, technology is improving every single day. So a little part, of course, you leave open because you know that there's going to be technological advances. You know that you got to be ambitious in your goal setting. But usually we try to get companies to already work with us beforehand, where we make a whole analysis of their emissions and see what kind of the best case scenario for them is until 2030. Because if you have set yourself that goal, you need to do your best to achieve it. And, that's what I think is a mistake that a lot of companies make, is that, net zero sounds so sexy. So they want to suddenly publicize to everyone that they want to do it until 2030. But of course, like you said, if there's no strategy behind it, then you're going to be in a pickle, because at one point you're going to sit down your stakeholders and you're going to say, okay, what now? How on earth are we going to achieve it? This is like me signing up for a marathon 2 days before and then kind of panicking and maybe in the end not even taking part at the marathon because it's all too scary. So at ClimatePartner, we have developed kind of this holistic climate action strategy, which is quite easy to understand. And it's something that most of us already know we should be doing, but it just kind of makes all these steps clear. And I think in any plan that you make, it's really important to define concrete steps that you're going to take, so that also you can be really happy with the achievements you have made. So that's kind of benchmarking and kind of understanding which milestones you've already achieved. And it all starts with measuring your carbon footprint. That's kind of the first step every company should do, and it's really not too difficult. So of course it depends on the complexity of the company, but you can measure the carbon footprint of products, you can measure carbon footprint of your events, you can measure your carbon footprint of your company, and so on. So after you've measured your emissions, after you understand where your hotspots really are, because this is not just measuring, not just you having one number in the end that tells you nothing, but really understanding which are your problem areas and also which are your opportunities to improve. Based on that, you can set yourself reduction goals. And I always tell every company, make 2 different goals at least. Make a long-term and make a short-term goal. Because a short-term goal is really going to motivate your employees, because your employees are the biggest strength of your company. They will come up with the most amazing creative ideas. And also they are in charge of their departments. They know exactly what's possible in a department. They're the experts. And if you set them a goal until 2050, well, for many of them, that's just kind of way there in the future. So what can I really do on a daily basis to contribute to a 2050 goal? But to a 2025 goal, I can contribute. I have so many ideas that can actually be taken into action quite soon. But a long-term goal is also really important, just kind of for strategic decisions, for leading your whole company, kind of the northern star of your company. So after you've set yourself reduction goals, obviously the meaningful next step is to take reductions. So you know where you want to go, you have checked your emissions, you have a strategy in place. Okay, now start implementing it. Easiest one, always, if you haven't done that, the first step is always switch to green energy, right? So just switch your tariff to green energy, and I guarantee you're going to reduce a lot of your emissions in that. So this is something I can tell to every company. You know, it's great if you also build your own source of green energy. Like nowadays, a lot of people work with solar or hydro energy, but just switching your electricity contract is going to do a big impact in the world. And after that, you can really start checking also other areas. With a lot of companies, actually, the biggest hotspots in their emissions is the employee mobility, because people drive their car to get to your company every day. Okay, so what can I do to motivate my employees in case public transport is not possible, to maybe car share and reduce emissions in that way? And then we come to the fourth step, which is also really important, which kind of looks outside of our company, and that is the support of certified climate action projects. So these certified climate action projects take place all over the world, and they really prevent the existence of further CO2 emissions, or they're even absorbing CO2 emissions out of the atmosphere. So we call that a compensation, which means you have measured your emissions, and then you compensate these emissions. Of course, you don't forget about the reduction, about goal setting, but it's really important. Also, science-based targets tells us this. The IPCC tells us that, to reach our global net zero goals, we need to invest in green technologies, kind of invest in the technological development to absorb more emissions, but also in nature-based solutions. But of course, what we cannot forget at the same time is the social impact of these projects, so that these projects really follow one or more SDGs to improve the lives of people that live in the area of this project. And then in the fifth step, and this is really, really important, is transparent communication. Do good and also talk about it, but talk about it in a really transparent way, because nowadays just saying that you're green is not enough, because no one understands what you mean with that. There's so many companies that have been green or blue or whatever they have called themselves, creating their own labels for years, where the consumer, the stakeholders didn't really understand what stands behind it. So, just bite in that sour apple and report on your emissions. You're going to have to do it quite soon under the CSRD, but you can do it now already. So show your consumers that you are really taking this issue seriously, and you're not hiding behind, some floscles, but you're working on it.
You mentioned labels and green and blue, and your company was one of the earliest to release a kind of seal of approval that companies can use, and that's evolved over time, right? I mean, I think some kind of independent certification is necessary, but as you mentioned, it can be confusing if there are too many things out there, or if they're vague and don't have kind of a specific checklist, like say B Corp has or something like that. What's the state of play around certifications and standards now, and what should consumers and companies know?
Yeah, so the EU is working on quite a lot of projects when it comes to that. And the most famous is the Green Claims Directive, which is probably going to go live in all the national states of the EU somewhere in 2026. So the final draft, so the final version has not been posted yet. So I can't say too much about it, but I do encourage everyone to kind of Google it, see what the current status of that is. And the point of this directive is really to kind of prevent greenwashing through labels. So companies won't be able to just write to, get a designer, make themselves a nice label, and somehow give the consumer a feeling that they are very green or whatever, that they are super sustainable. It's really going to have to be certified by a third party. So ClimatePartner used to be quite known for our label Climate Neutral, so CO2 neutral. And we kind of really stepped away now from that wording in our claim. So we listened to the market, and the market said, listen, there's still actually no definition of climate neutrality where everyone would be using the same definition, which is really a shame, because we've been trying to really work on that, to get kind of an ISO standard to take place. But unfortunately, so far, that still hasn't happened. So now we switch to ClimatePartner, certified as a label. But of course, still, we are very famous for our QR code, which the consumers can scan. And under this QR code, they get all the information about the company or the product. So the carbon footprint that we have measured, the goals that the company has set themselves, the reduction measures that they have already made, because it's important to celebrate the good things that have already been done, and also which climate action projects they support.
Okay, so your labels have kind of individual QR code. They have an individual code that relates to each company, where people can go and go into the in-depth. So the label is actually just kind of an ad for the report, basically, that gives them all the information that they need.
Yeah, so it's an officially registered warranty, because you need to take certain steps to be able to get this label. So if you have the label, you're in good company, because other companies that have this label have also done these 5 steps and are reporting about them. So of course, once you send this information officially in the universe, you're also going to be really motivated to kind of stick to the plan. So we go back to the net zero goal that you have mentioned, where companies, once they have set themselves a net zero goal, they really need to do their best to achieve it, because otherwise in 2030, they're going to have to disappoint their stakeholders a little bit and say, well, maybe we didn't do enough in the past few years to actually reach it.
And that's a great way to connect the products themselves to the reporting and to the information, because I find a lot of times these reports live under, 3 tabs on the homepage of a company's website. And if I'm eating, I don't know, a chocolate bar, I'm not going to usually just make the connection and be like, oh, I'm going to go surf to their website and go click under legal privacy and find the sustainability report or something. But if it's right there and I can scan it on my phone, then it might create some more awareness and that kind of like direct connection to the product itself.
Yeah, of course, not everyone is going to do that, and that's understandable. And I feel like in climate action, that's always really difficult to find the right balance between giving enough information, but also at the same time not overloading the consumer with the information, because not everyone, of course, has the time to read the whole, like you say, the whole sustainability report of the company. That's unrealistic to think that. And for a long time, companies were also hiding behind that a little bit. So their sustainability reports were so long, 150 pages long. It's like terms and conditions, right? That all the apps are always offering you, which is made on purpose so that no one is ever going to read that. But with us, you can go on this tracking page and you see that it's made in a really clear and concise way. And it's also supported by numbers. I think that's really important to kind of quantify everything that you're doing, because we can all be poets, and kind of spin the message however we want when we are just describing what we're doing. But if you support this with numbers, with your concrete carbon footprint and with your concrete goal of how much you want to reduce your carbon footprint for, well, that's very difficult to interpret in any kind of different way.
And we live in a bit of a strange time right now with this kind of reporting, because most of it's voluntary. And as you say, in Europe, that's changing pretty soon. But you have this kind of weird structure where some companies are reporting on this and doing a very good job. Some of them are a much bigger percentage, I would say, are reporting and, it needs work, but the majority are not reporting at all. And it's that middle group that as soon as you report and kind of there are questions or something's not as easily explained or it's more complicated, that's where the fires start on Twitter and people are kind of criticizing this. So whereas, probably what we should be doing is penalizing the groups that are not reporting at all and going after them and saying, where is your report? But it's kind of like it's this very calculated silence and it's working to their advantage right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really a shame to kind of say either you are 100% perfect or you're bad. But I think generally, as a society, we do tend to see things. We kind of tend to box things in certain drawers. So there's, good or bad, and there's nothing in between. But I think everyone should just look at themselves as an individual and see, okay, maybe not everything that I'm doing in my life is actually so sustainable. But you know what? There's some areas in which I can really do something good for the world. So for instance, for me, it's that I haven't been eating meat for a couple of years and that I travel a lot with a train. Whenever I'm visiting my family in Slovenia, I always take the train, to kind of prevent driving with a car and so on. But for someone else, maybe that means something completely different. So for instance, my dad loves meat. Of course, he's Slovenian. I can never get him to switch to vegetarian. Forget about it.
Juicy Marbles, come on, is from Slovenia.
Absolutely, you're right.
Delicious plant-based steak. I had some for dinner last night.
They're amazing. I know. I never shopped at Bila Plus. This is such a plug, but now I'm always doing it just because they're selling Juicy Marbles. But anyways, but on the other hand, my dad never did the driver's license because for years he has been committed to taking public transport. So this is a guy who has been driving to work for the past 40 years every day with either the train or bus. And that's great. But, we live under different conditions. And the same goes really for companies, because some companies just have products that per se maybe are not the most climate friendly, but we need them. So now we had a huge success story with an aluminium industry company with whom we did a whole decarbonization roadmap, and they have set themselves amazing targets, even though, of course, aluminium, as we know, does cause quite a lot of emissions. But the fact is also we need aluminium. We need it. We need it for buildings. We need it in the industry. Okay, but how do we make this product and this company more climate friendly? It's quite easy for, let's say, a
services company.
Exactly, a services company. Or if you have a plant-based product per se, then it's going to be easier for you probably, at least on the level of the product, to reduce your emissions. But we really need to just give everyone the chance to do their best.
What are some of the other highlights so far that you've seen with companies that you've worked with? Like, what are some interventions that have worked really well that could be replicable to other companies?
So many, it's difficult to really kind of now just give you a couple of examples, because we work with so many different industries, and every industry has its own specific issues, but also its own specific opportunities. I love it when companies, for example, if these are B2C companies or B2B, so when they kind of really proactively involve the next person or company in their chain. So when, let's say, the companies really involved their consumers in their climate action. So here I'm thinking of UK, the Mindful Chef, who now, they're a food delivery service. So with them, we have really measured the carbon footprint of all of their products. And based on that, now they're offering a low carbon range in which then the consumers can choose, so they can really filter their offer and really decide for products, for their foods that do have a lower carbon impact. I think that's great. And they also do a lot in terms of educating their customers. But then we have company, for instance, in Austria, Lenzing, who is a very B2B company in the textile industries. And we have so many of their suppliers or their clients who have now connected together with us because they were really saying, hey guys, look at everything that we're doing. What are you doing for climate action? So I love the success stories when companies manage to kind of inspire the next person, the next company, because often you have a feeling that you're just kind of this small dot in the world that can't really make any change, whether it's your company or you as a person. But imagine, if you manage to inspire 3 people, if you manage to inspire 2 other companies, this is going to cause sort of like a domino effect where hopefully one day we're all doing something in climate action.
It's kind of the perfect setup for this network effect because it's not just like passing on good news and, referring a friend, but actually as companies get their suppliers and customers to drink the Kool-Aid on this, it's helping their own goals as well, right? Because with scope 3 emissions, with this type of thing, so if I'm a food retailer, if I'm a grocery store, then getting the companies that supply the products on board with this kind of thing is going to ultimately affect my carbon footprint as well, right? In a positive way. So good setup.
Exactly. And this is kind of also what the Science-Based Targets initiative is really trying to do, where the companies that really have most of their emissions in scope 3 are encouraged to set themselves engagement goals. And engagement goals actually mean, okay, how many other companies are you going to engage to set themselves also kind of a science-based targets? Some might call it even a little bit of a networking scheme, but it's in the best sense. It's a best sense multi-level marketing for the world. That's one that's worth supporting.
Yeah, so multi-level marketing ends up being the solution to climate change.
Who would have thought?
Well, I mean, nothing surprises me anymore. So, changing tacks a little bit. I recently hosted you as a speaker. Thank you very much at Vienna's Food Hack Meetup, where you were talking about decarbonizing the grocery chain, but you also kind of spoke a bit about some natural ways of decarbonization, and I was really interested to hear about your love of and the related facts about bogs and seagrasses in fighting climate change. Why are these important?
Yeah, I think as a person, and a lot of people can relate, I always root for the underdog. I always root for kind of those hidden champions. And a few years ago, I discovered this fact about bogs. And I don't know if everyone knows what bogs are. So they're usually kind of these, you can imagine them as this small or sometimes also big areas of kind of still water. A lot of people...
Like wetlands and swamps and this type of thing.
Exactly. And people usually kind of connect a negative connotation with that. They're kind of the stinky brown areas of water that no one really knows what to do with it. There's maybe some nerds who are researching some insects in there, but otherwise no one really wants to have much to do with them. And for years, bogs have actually been dried out because people just didn't see any use of them. This is unfortunately the system that we live in. Nothing is kept just because it's already there. We need to have a certain use for it, and bogs didn't really serve humanity much, or at least that's what we thought. So a lot of bogs all across Europe, all across the world have been dried out. But the thing is, bogs make out 3% of the Earth's surface, but they actually absorb more CO2 emissions than all the forests in our world, which is amazing. But of course, it's also a double-edged sword, because once you dry them out, all those emissions go right back into the atmosphere. So we have really contributed a lot of the CO2 emissions into the atmosphere by just drying out these amazing lands. And, most of the people know this currently. Unfortunately, we don't just have the issue of the climate crisis, but we also have a biodiversity crisis. And the bogs, of course, are also really important living spaces for biodiversity for many species who unfortunately, have now already died out. And the same goes for seagrass. I was listening to a different podcast, I think about a year ago, and they hosted, of course, I'm not going to remember his name, but this guy from the US who started now a big company of kind of vertically farming seagrass, because seagrass also absorbs in really a lot of CO2 emissions. But seagrass has the benefit that we also can eat it. So I think that has a lot of potential, because suddenly we as people say, oh, you know what, I do like sushi. I like, especially Asian countries use seagrass a lot in their food. So I think that really has a potential, because suddenly we're showing people this kind of benefit. But we have this great project in terms of bogs. I just want to mention that we have a great project that we work with at ClimatePartner, where companies can support the nature park Karwendel. It's in Tyrol, where we financially support kind of the renaturalization, so the rebuilding kind of bogs. Because like I said, per se, bogs often don't have kind of a financial benefit for us as humanity, unfortunately, but companies can really then do an impact by financially supporting these park rangers in the park, that they are really taking care of these bogs and kind of preventing those bogs to live the same fate that they did in the 70s, where they all got dried out.
I'll post a link to that in the show notes for anyone who wants to adopt a bog. Where is the best place for people to reach you online?
You can contact me on LinkedIn. Check my name in the podcast notes, I guess, because I think if I say it now, anyways, everyone is going to spell it incorrectly except the Slovenians. So that is kind of the best way to reach me, or just reach me at manca.jurca@climatepartner.com to my email address. Always love to talk with interested people.
I'll put that in there as well. That sounds great. Manca, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thanks for listening to another ClimateTech podcast. It would mean a lot if you would subscribe, rate, and share this podcast. Get in touch anytime with tips and guest recommendations at hello@climatetechpod.com. Find me, Ryan Grant Little, on LinkedIn. I'll be back with another episode next week. Bye for now.